who cares about the player? My name's Chris Brindley, I'm the non-exec director for Switch to Play. And we are a social enterprise and we have one aim. And that is to support players both through and after their sporting careers. And the reason we started this off is because we've done both academic research but also lots of player research. And it's the players that have asked us to create the concept of Switch to Play. And we're very fortunate that we have many sporting Olympic medalists, world champions, as both our directors and the associates. So you can see there we've posed the question, who is responsible for the player through and after their journey through sport? And it could be the club, it could be the federation, it could be the national governing body, or even the agent. And where does the player sit in all of this? What I want to do is give you some of the benefits of having a better person by looking at the holistic role of all of those people in making the player better at who they are and what they do. And let me give you a non-football example straight away.
And now the All Blacks just waiting for the French to peel off the tracksuits, stand in front of them and receive the challenge of the haka. Well, the challenge has been received.
That's woke everybody up after lunch. That was the New Zealand All Blacks ahead of the 2011 World Cup final against France, which you all know they won. That's a picture of the All Blacks in 2015, which again shows world champions. And success is temporary, class is permanent. So what is the secret that the All Blacks leadership team talk about success and talk about success becoming continual success? Because I think the reason a lot of you here at SoccerX is because the club you're associated with, you would like to replicate some of the All Blacks. So what's the single phrase that the All Blacks use? It's actually talking about better people making better athletes. And if you're thinking, so what about the football example? Go and have a read of Dash Reboot, which is the story of how the German national team went from the lowest of the low to become the World Cup winners. And let's remember, they beat Brazil 7-1 in Brazil in the semi-final of that tournament. So better people make better athletes. And actually, what does that mean? I know you're in Manchester. I'm only showing you a picture of a pie, not because that's our staple diet, But if you actually look at some of the success in the business world, and you look at an organisation called General Electric, run by a guy called Jack Welch, he created a new monic of pie, which I brought into my sporting world. And actually, when you start talking to the likes of James Kerr, who created Legacy for New Zealand, or you start to talk to Joachim Low, this absolutely resonates with them. Because players are obsessed by performance, and clubs are obsessed by players' performance. But that actually isn't about being the best human being you can be. Because ultimately, to have a better person and get a better athlete, the question I have is, what's the image? And if you'd have been around Manchester over this weekend, we've had a very high-profile footballer across the front pages of every newspaper. And the really sad thing is that those stories were nothing to do with performance, despite the fact that player is the leading goal scorer for his club, the leading goal scorer for his country. So, what is the image? And if I've got any commercial directors in the audience today, you surely would want your player to have a better image for your club, for your partners, for your sponsors. Because ultimately, you would want the image of your players and your club to be the best you can be. That's what the New Zealanders pride themselves on. That's what the Germans pride themselves on. So image is one thing. Then the final thing is exposure to decision makers and influencers. So a lot of players spend their time on the P. We believe that actually to spend time on the I and the E would be better for the club and longer term better for the player. Because the three things I can guarantee for any player, and I notice I've got one or two in the audience today, is that you're going to pay tax, you're going to die, and I don't care how good your sports scientist is at your club, your career is going to end. And your career outside of sport will be twice as long as your career in sport. And we want to start people on the journey that when their sporting career ends, actually the transition into my world as a commercial businessman actually is as seamless as possible. So that's me, and there's some of the roles I do, both in sport and business. And the two that are interesting, particularly around helping people transition, are the bottom two. So Thomas International is the leading psychometric profiling organisation. And we actually profile sports people now, both players and coaches, to help create a level of self-awareness, to create understanding of communication, image, and actually, if you are exposed and you do meet influencers, you will be the best person you will be, as well as a great player. And Goodson Thomas, we do executive search. So many players are looking for roles after sport that earns them in excess of £100,000. I'm able to tell you what skills you need in the commercial world, and often, I don't care how many goals you scored at Wembley, I don't care how many tries you scored at Twickenham or at anywhere else. I would want you to have the skill set to enable my organisation to grow and you to grow alongside it. My other role in life is being the managing director of the fastest growing bank in the world, which is Metro Bank, which we grew from zero. So I'm all about growing talent, which is why, as a non-exec director, I still spend 3 days a month growing talent. That's what I care about. And that's why I became the non-exec director of Switch to Play. We just want to make people better at who they are and what they do. So actually, there's 3 takeaways. I've just tried to explain why better people make world champions. But should we do it because we want better people? What if we take no action? The stats might be hard to see, but you start looking at some of these. 96% of people that have played in an academy at soccer don't make it. 3% are lost to the game completely within a few years. They're disillusioned with the sport. They think their life's over. And who's responsible? That's the question we're posing, because I'm not sure anybody truly takes responsibility. You can see that 1/3 of former footballers get divorced within the first 12 months after finishing playing. I think if we do nothing to support people through their transition journey, I think disaster is imminent for human beings that have given up a number of years to their chosen sport, where nobody takes responsibility for supporting that player. Here's some of the newspaper headlines you've seen. Mental health, right? We had, again, high profile of an Everton footballer found wandering in Manchester with mental health problems. How do we let it get that bad? Chris Boyd came out and wanted players to talk about the issues that they face. I just wonder if anybody can guess who that might be. Spurs and Lazio legend that still, despite being an amazing talent, despite having the P of performance at the highest level, has not got a good image. And when he is exposed to decision makers or influenced, he lets himself down, where people do not want to support him with life after sport. And actually 1 in 3 footballers battle depression after retiring. How do we let that happen? That's the question we pose, and that is why we were asked to come together as a group of ex-athletes, directors and people from the commercial world like myself to actually make sure that we do something about it and we call it out. But everybody says they care. I hear national governing bodies say they care, I hear clubs say they care, I hear associations and federations and players' bodies, they all say they care. Really? I'd pose that this might be closer to the truth. There's everybody, somebody, anybody and nobody, and there's a job to be done. Everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody seemed to realise that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. And that's what we want to call out. But actually, the responsibility starts with you. I do not care what role you have in your club. I don't care whether you're an agent, I don't care whether you're a national governing body and association. Buy a mirror. Have a look in that mirror and ask what you can do. Because when I speak to people, it's always somebody else's job, or they say they do it. I don't think you can do a transition workshop for an athlete in 3 hours. Talking about networking, talking about transferable skills, talking about effective parenting, talking about coping with how you have a career after sport. Because often you'll get to that point where your career you think is over. If you're an academy player, that might be the age of 16 and 17. If you're an athlete that hasn't qualified for Rio in the Olympics, or a footballer that at the age of 25, 26, has had their career ended through injury, you've got to then translate into the new world. Or you might just be that wonderful example of a 35-year-old that's had a great 20-plus year career, but it still comes to an end. And ultimately, you've got 60 years left. What are you going to do? So I want to challenge people, whatever role you have, please look in the mirror and ask yourself, are you doing everything you can do to support that athlete and that player? Because the crazy thing is, you would want that player to be the best on the pitch, but look at them as a human being, because they are. And here's 3 people, so it's not just famous names. Graham Potter. Graham Potter didn't make it at the highest level of football, but believed that better humans make better athletes. So he went to Sweden with Österlunds and actually wanted to take his principles of better people making better athletes and took a 4th division Swedish team to become the top tier in Sweden, win the Swedish Cup, and recently beat Galatasaray, the world famous Galatasaray from Turkey, in a European competition. Kevin Sinfield. Kevin Sinfield is possibly one of the greatest ever rugby league players ever to have played rugby league. Kevin was doing his transition whilst at the age of 19, 20 and 21, despite being one of the top players, knowing that it would make him a better athlete for Leeds Rugby League Club. And by the way, when you talk about image, this is Kevin Sinfield, who finished 2nd in Sports Personality of the Year. Rugby League hasn't got that many fans. to actually make him become second in that vote against other people, Lewis Hamilton's of this world. But he did. Why? Because actually the image Kevin Sinfield portrays is one of humility, one of learning, one of growth. Beth Tweddle. Beth Tweddle won a World Championship and an Olympic medal while still competing. So I'd like to debunk the myth that every bit of time you have as an athlete is about performance. Because there's people who've chosen to invest some time in their future whilst playing and has made them world champions, Olympic medalists, and actually be at the top of their game. Because they're very clear, hope is not a plan. They have a plan, they're very clear who they work with, what they want to achieve, and they use all the available teams around them to actually make them better at who they are and what they do. And here's the list of organisations that Switch the Play are now starting to work with, because they're starting to believe in our vision as well, that better people make better athletes. And we have a duty of care, and those of you involved in UK sport will be aware that Tanni Gray-Thompson, Dame Tanni Gray-Thompson, is talking about the duty of care for athletes. So these are the organisations that are now starting to realise that they, as a holistic organisation, can make more money, have better success on and off the field by working with players and taking player care seriously. And it's not just about on the field. So therefore, who is responsible? And again, I'd ask you to really go and look in a mirror and ask everybody from your club or your association or any organisation you're involved with to ask some real searching questions about players and their future. And I'm going to hand over now to an athlete who's going to explain the 90-10 principle. Somebody who's played at the very highest level, that is living proof, that actually applying some of your time for your future while still playing at the highest level is going to benefit you. Leon Lloyd, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Firstly, because I've not been called an athlete for about 10 years. I've been retired for 10 years, so thanks for that. So I'm from a different sport. I played rugby. My dream was to play for Coventry City. That didn't work out. The scouts got it completely wrong, so I went to a different sport and played rugby. I realised, not coming from a rugby background, that I was very lucky to play professional sport. To get paid to do something that I love doing, get paid well, and all the sports that come with it, I felt very fortunate. And it wasn't until I had my first ever injury at the age of 20, I think it was, my first knee operation, one of many, that I thought to myself, if I don't recover from this injury, what's next for me? I'm going to have to join the real world and get a proper job. So I started looking at my own, I didn't think of it as transition at the time, but I thought I need to upskill myself. What can I do differently? I read the stats around that we saw earlier on, you know, the divorces and the bankruptcies and everything else. I read those, I thought, I need to prepare for that. So I went and shadowed during the off-season, much to my teammates' disgust really. During the off-season, when they were off in Ibiza or Marbella, wherever they were, I went and shadowed our club CEO. So I worked with him for a couple of days. Then I went and spent a day in the ticket office. Then I went and spent a day in the accounts department. And I learned how a club ran from those incidents. I realised, yes, as a player, we were a part of the big organisation. But I also realised that if I didn't do my job on the pitch, or our team didn't, then that had an impact on the ticket sales, because I was answering the phones to disgruntled supporters telling me how bad the team played, and I'm on the other end of the phone hearing it. I realised that has a knock-on effect for the commercial teams selling the hospitality. But until I'd had that exposure to that world, I didn't really understand it. It was all about me. If someone asked me to do something, unless it made me a better player, I wasn't interested. My aim was to play as best as I could for my club and play for my country. So you see at the bottom there, I'm very fortunate enough to play for a relatively successful side. When we were there, we won many trophies, and we were in that space the whole time. But many of my peers who achieved far more than I did, won World Cups and become British Lions, didn't really think about their career. What I realised when my career happened was, when my career injury happened, career-ending injury, was that I planned for the bits which were very visible, so the financial side, but I failed to plan for the team bit. I'd been told for 15 years where to be, what to do, what to wear, what to eat. I could tell you on a Thursday at 2 p.m. in 3 weeks' time where I needed to be, what I was wearing and everything else, because that's the structure that I had in my life. Get to 30, retire after another knee operation, and then all of a sudden I can choose where I have to be and I don't really know what I'm doing. Now that may sound a bit weird, but that's the structure that you're used to, and as soon as you take that away, it's quite difficult. So I went and I wrote a book about it. So that book before was not about me and my journey. It's more about what would I tell a younger version of myself. So I went and did some research on it, and not just on rugby, but did lots of other sports. Now, some of you may be familiar with this. This is the Kubler-Ross change curve, designed in the 1960s, which is not sport-specific. It's designed to deal with grief or significant change in your life. Now, I was introduced to it by Chris when he was talking about how he used it in Metrobank, and I realised that those 7 stages, although when Chris was talking about it in a different dynamic, related to me as well in my sports career, I went through each of those. Now, we haven't got time to go through all of them now. We've got it on our board on our stand here, and I can go through it later on. But just to quickly go through, these are the 7 stages that I went through. The anxiety of being told my contract was not being renewed or had a career-ending injury. Thinking the denial piece, thinking that I can fix money, I'm going to get a second opinion, a third opinion, a fourth opinion, then realise the dream is probably over. And this is the part that Chris talked about before, the valley of despair, we call it, where you get in that bottom piece and you're trying desperately hard to get out, but you can't because you don't really know where you're going, you've got no direction. So I apologise for going through this quickly, but what we try and do at Switch to Play is, and from the research that we've got and the people I've interviewed is, regardless of what ball you play with, what kit you wear, if you're in the pool, on a pitch, on a court, you'll go through that. Because it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to recreate the feeling that you get running out in front of 50,000 people every week. 100,000 people at Twickenham. It's very difficult to recreate that. And some of the people I spoke to said how they chase that adrenaline, 50 grand on red. That's how some people chase that adrenaline that they miss from their rugby and some of their football, and that's how you see some of the issues that we have, we read about in the media. So, part of the solution, what do we do? How can we help that? We do a number of different masterclass sessions, which again I'm not going to go through now, but some of the things that have been designed by athletes, by players, that they said, people who have gone through the system already and had different variants of successes, we designed these solutions for them. And I'll give you a couple of examples now. So the brand of you. You as a brand, you realise that what you do reflects you individually, but also the club that you represent. Now, not many players will stay at the same club throughout their whole career, but the brand is still them. So that travels with them. So it's important that you protect that brand. And the commercial people in the room will understand how important that person is when they've got their brand, what they do when they're outside of the club, when they're not wearing their kit, it still reflects them. Maximising your network. How many people, how many players, part of your job to go out and meet people, you've got to go and meet the sponsors, you've got to go and do a community piece. How many players actually want to go and do that? I can tell you now, none. Because it gets in the way of them being a football player. If it didn't help them become a better player, score more goals, save goals, and me personally, if it wasn't to make me a better player, I had no interest in it. So until someone explained to me that going to meet these people, maximise my network, the people that I'm actually meeting might be my potential boss, partner, a potential sponsor of the club, so that everybody wins, then I realised there was a win-win-win situation. We create this by, from a player's perspective. We've got a platform called Switched On, and it's called Switched On, and I suppose it's been referred to by our members as the LinkedIn for athletes. It's called Switched On because at some point in your career, you're going to have to switch on to understanding you need another job. There is life after sport. 90% of athletes across all sports, NFL, NBA, football, regardless of the money, are going to have to get a normal job. So at some point, you're going to have to switch on. Now, that may come from a parent, a coach, an injury, an agent, whoever, but it has to happen. And what we enable them to do is create a visible CV. So we get people who come to us and say, okay, well, send me your CV, and they don't really know what to write down there. They've scored maybe 3 goals, 10 goals, top goal scorer, top try scorer, whatever they've done. But when you try and put that across to a potential employer, or when you talk about what your interests are, it's very difficult to do that. And this platform, by Wakelet, which enables you to take your best bits in a visible way and enhance your CV. Again, if I'm not explaining it properly, we've got it shown on our screen here, and we're here for the next 2 days, so please come over and speak to us. So Chris mentioned the 90-10 principle. Now, what does that mean? I spent a lot of time working on my my off-field stuff, but what that means is we want the athlete to spend 10% of their downtime. Not 10% of their time thinking about personal development, 10% of their downtime. And you get a lot of time as a professional athlete, and you think you're busy, but a lot of that time, either on computers or doing whatever you're doing, but just 10%, a small piece, will come back and pay dividends in the future. So that's our 90-10 principle. And we don't think it's too difficult to do. And there's so many ways that they can do that themselves. So on that point, I'll pass back over to Chris. Again, I apologise, I'm speaking too quickly.
Cheers, Leon. Thank you. Well done. And I talk about the 90-10 principle in my role, in the commercial role, because I talk about how people can spend 10% of their time on the I and the E, developing their future. Leon's too modest, but let me tell you, he finished playing 10 years ago. He's still got a car deal with one of the sponsors, still 10 years on. If it had a really poor image, if he wasn't good at networking, if he didn't expose positively, actually himself and his value set to those partners, the car deal would have ended the day his career ended. That's the thing I believe agent, national governing body, federation, club can do to actually support players both on and off the field. So what's the future going to look like? Is it going to look exactly the same as it does now? With somebody, everybody, anybody being responsible, but in reality, nobody grabbing it by the throat, nobody taking the holistic requirement of the player during and after their career and making it personal. That's what I'd ask you to do. And I talk about windows and mirrors. Lots of people look out the window and point the finger and blame everybody else. I'd actually to look in that mirror and ask what you can do in your sport to make a difference to the player. Because it's a limited time career, but it's a long life. So to finish, we're going to talk about that word responsibility again. If you break it down, it's the ability to respond. So what are you going to do? So at Switch to Play, we have a concept called 24/7/31. What are you going to do in the next 24 hours? Funnily enough, we're about 24 hours away from Soccer X finishing. Our stand is there. We've got Colin Wall from Southend United, Rob Young MBE, we've got Leon Lloyd and myself. We'd love to talk to you in the next 24 hours about whether or not we can help. 7, what are you going to do in the next 7 days? Please go back to your organisation if you're in the business of players, athletes, and ask what do you really do and who can make the difference. How can you put a fund aside maybe to support the player through the maximising the network, transferable skills? And in 31 days, I'd love to have a conversation with you at your workplace to put together a programme to make your club, your organisation and your players better. We've got Switch to Play and we're here to help. And how many presentations have you been to that finish, thanks for listening, good luck? There's no such thing as luck in sport, is there? Really? Well, I searched high and low for a definition of luck and I found it in a book about a Roman general called Seneca. Seneca said, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I'm really clear. There are opportunities right across business and sport. But isn't it spooky that those that prepare notice and grab the opportunities? Those that don't prepare and prepare early enough tend to be the ones that come as a real distress case, and it's very, very difficult to actually help them when they're 20 years behind some other people, whether business and sport. So we're around, we're online, there's lots of different ways of communicating with us, but I'd just like to thank you for your time today, and just remember, players in the room, or you're responsible for players, you have a responsibility, and I hope you are able to respond and support the player to get the benefit on the pitch, off the pitch, and for your club or your organisation to the most successful it can be. Thanks very much for listening. Have a great Soccer X.